Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Beatles Forever. In our last episode, Mal and the Beatles went to Paris and saw Beatlemania happening there. Mal and a driver the Beatles had hired had to fight off French pressmen who had expected to interview the Beatles and started to mob them when they didn't want to be interviewed. Okay, Mal and the driver got rid of them. Then the Beatles went to America and found out how popular they were. They had thousands of fans waiting for them at the airport. It was a fun time for them all. Then when Mal got back to England, he had to leave his family once more when he went with the Beatles to do their film, A Hard Day's Night. He apologized to Lil for not writing as often as he should, but said he would be home for her and Gary very soon. So let's see what's going on today. Mal was in a good mood on March 11th. He wrote to his wife Lily, "Here is your Mally with a letter to you. Today, for the first time, I got involved with the film. Morning started as normal, hanging around, getting sore feet, and doing nothing. Then they wanted equipment on the set, so away I went. All afternoon it was hectic, fixing equipment up in the guard's van for quite a funny scene in which the boys do card playing and finish up by singing a number I should have known better." The next week, Mal had the busiest time in the whole of that crazy year. He enjoyed private screenings of the American comedy Irma la Douce and the James Bond movie From Russia with Love with the Beatles. The Beatles liked to tease Mal, and at one moment, George placed plastic cups inside Mal's shirt pockets, and then George filled them with milk. John told Mal that after Sarnies, British slang for sandwiches, "You are my favorite animal." Mal got intimidated by John, especially after he lost John's most cherished Gibson Jumbo. He wrote in his diary he worried about his role in the Beatles' orbit, which often felt precarious. The day after he wrote in his diary, he was put to the test again. After performing 2 shows, including Top of the Pops, the Beatles entered a charity event at London's Dorchester Hotel. In the early hours of the morning, March the 19th, Mal started to get the equipment into the ballroom for their performance. He said, "I was dismayed and felt rather terrible at having to set up the equipment in the middle of the floor amongst a tie and tail crowd dressed in my road clothes, wearing a jacket and leather elbow patches. The audience was a mixture of high society and famous film, television, and recording personalities. Even Prime Minister Harold Wilson was on hand, posing for photos with the boys after presenting them with Show Business Personality of 1963 awards." Mal enjoyed the event. He got to mingle with personalities like Welsh comedian Harry Seacombe, who served as master of ceremonies. Mal felt, though, he was underdressed among all the people there. He was still getting over Brian telling him about improving his style of dressing. Things got worse that Friday night. He made a mistake during the taping of Ready, Steady, Go. He walked in front of the camera inadvertently, and he upstaged the presenter, Keith Fordyce. At this point, the Beatles had a fame that was unknown at that time. It forced them to make unusual arrangements to conduct their lives. March 21st, they wanted to avoid the regular encampment of fans who followed the bandmates' every move. Neil and Mal were forced to work in the pre-dawn hours of the morning to move George and Ringo to their new place, a flat at Wadden House in Knightsbridge. John and Cynthia had taken up residence in a cozy apartment in Kensington with baby Julian, and Paul moved in with his girlfriend Jane Asher at her family's Wimpole Street townhome. Jane had just turned 18 and was one of London's most promising young actresses in the theater. Mal and Neil added a new van to replace the Ford. It was a blue Commer, registration number 6677ED. The vehicle was a workhorse, and it took Mal and Neil all over London and beyond with the Beatles and their equipment, and taking them home now and again to visit their families. For Mal, the new van had become an additional burden, requiring frequent repairs, as the Beatles and their entourage pushed the vehicle to its capacity. Just like George and Ringo, Mal and Neil were in need of a more dependable accommodation, having spent numerous nights at London's President Hotel. Neil recalled that we all gradually moved to London. I think Mal Evans and I were the last ones to get a flat because we couldn't afford it. Eventually, they had to get us a flat because staying in hotels, as we did, was even more expensive. Mal and Neil got a place at 16 Montague Mews West. He felt it was almost like home. Even so, London was a culture shock for the Beatles' team of transplanted Liverpudlians. Tony Bramwell pointed out that we found Londoners hard to get along with. They saw us as the scousers and whacks and witty scallywags, speaking a strange lingo that nobody seemed to understand. At this time, Mal's sister June also moved to London. She was accepted at the Centre School to begin her dramatic studies. As Mal made his trips to Liverpool and back, he would return to London with care packages for June from Waldegrave Road. June later remembered that Malcolm would bring food parcels down from Liverpool, but of course he was so busy that she would get the parcel a week later and the eggs would have gone rotten. Mal made sure June would be able to see some of the band's recording sessions. June said, "But I was a folk singer and I was really snooty about rock and roll music." And this attitude backfired on her when she passed on an opportunity, helpfully arranged by her brother, to sing backup for Eric Clapton. But then he was a relatively unknown guitarist. When April came, the Beatles finished their work on A Hard Day's Night, both the film and the LP. Mal found time to see a dentist who provided him with a new tooth to replace the one dislodged by the drunken cavern-goer back in the summer of 1962. At this time, Mal started to cater to the Beatles' every whim, ensuring that their meals were there precisely when they needed them. Mal developed a routine that accommodated their lives both as film actors and as recording artists. He wrote that filming in the studios was always easy for me. As early morning breakfast for the boys when they arrived on the set, it could be obtained from the studio canteen, and he got them tea and toast with jam and marmalade, usually being the order of the day, and for their long hours at EMI, Mal rustled up their meals from the studio's basement canteen, or for a change of pace, from all the manner of St. John Wood eateries. He started to know all about them. Mal was burning the candle at both ends. He had lost weight and kept having medical issues. He had an ear infection that caused him to have to go to the hospital. He struggled with his Beatles obligations and his family back home. One early Saturday morning, on his way to Liverpool to see his family, he fell asleep at the wheel of the van. He woke up in time to see he was only yards before he would have hit a large roundabout near Liverpool. He felt that somebody up there likes me. Lily and Mal were starting to feel a financial pinch with their new lives. Mal was juggling expenses in the capital, and Lil was trying to make ends meet on the Moseley Hill. Mal got more money than he had from his GPO days, but it still wasn't enough. Then he came up with an idea. In the recent months, he began to document the Beatles' meteoric rise, photographing them in performance, on Lester's film set, and on various forms of transportation from concert venue to another. Writing to Lil on April 17th, he told his wife, "I'm taking some photos of the Beatles, and I showed them to a freelance journalist who thinks that he would be able to sell some to the newspapers. Would be fab, wouldn't it, if I could make some money out of it? But please don't say anything to anyone," he added, "because the less people know about things like that, the better. Still, keep your fingers crossed for us." Next, Brian set the Beatles up for a full-fledged world tour. It was slated to begin on June the 4th in Copenhagen. The jaunt would take them from Northern Europe to Hong Kong and then through Australia and New Zealand before they made a midsummer return to their homeland. It was an ambitious tour, one that had taken careful planning on behalf of Brian and his team in NIMS. After the Beatles did a warm-up show at the Prince of Wales Theatre on May 31st, the band was in top form, ready to take on the world. Mal had just turned 29 days earlier and spent his time enduring that the Beatles' instruments were prepped for the tour ahead. Prior to the Prince of Wales performance, he made another trip to Drum City, this time to outfit Ringo with a new kit, a top-of-the-line Ludwig Super Classic model with oyster black pearl trim. By now, he had developed an easy routine in which he would circle among the city's instrument vendors to maintain the Beatles' gear: Drum City for Ringo, Sound City to get Paul's preferred bass strings, Selmer for John's favorite plectrums. Everything seemed to be falling into place. One afternoon before the tour was set to begin in Denmark, disaster struck in St. John's Wood. On June 3rd, as the Beatles posed for a photo shoot with the Saturday Evening Post, Ringo collapsed in a heap. Neil rushed him to the hospital, where he was diagnosed with acute tonsillitis and pharyngitis. Mal observed a feeling of gloom hum over everybody when they thought of the world tour without their drummer. In the moment, it seemed nothing short of unthinkable. Mal wrote, "How could the Beatles appear without Ringo?" Ringo was admitted to the University College Hospital. Then came the brainstorming. George Martin sided with Brian in terms of moving forward with the tour. For the past several months, Epstein had been working with promoters the world away, arranging the venues, hotels, motorcades, security, and merchandising. There were no out clauses in effect, and cancellation, to Brian's mind, meant the possibility of lawsuits and worse, a potential PR disaster that might upset the band's fame, which he was working so tirelessly to consolidate worldwide. For Brian, the old adage, "the show must go on," became literal. George Harrison came out strongly against the idea of moving forward with the tour. George is a very loyal person, Martin remembered, and he said, "If Ringo's not part of the group, it's not the Beatles, and I don't see why we should do it. I'm not going to go." Mal agreed with Harrison's perspective, and Ringo was the band's drummer. End of story. John and Paul seemed considerably less horrified by the idea of making the trip to Copenhagen with Ringo. They contemplated hiring a stand-in drummer. The idea of bringing Pete Best in briefly emerged, although John quickly dismissed the idea, pointing out that their erstwhile drummer had his own group now, the Pete Best Four. Besides, it might have looked as if we were taking him back, which is not good for him. People were agreeing with Brian about the show going on, so Martin looked into his Rolodex, and he phoned up an East End drummer named Jimmy Nicol, who had played in the Shub-Dubs and a band whose only claim to fame was a minor hit single called Humpty Dumpty, and more recently with George Fame and the Blue Flames. Jimmy was quickly summoned to the Abbey Road for an audition. Nichols remembered it was very mysterious. Nobody wanted to commit themselves, so I had to go along to EMI and meet them all and just rehearse for about 5 numbers, and that was it. As Jimmy was getting ready to leave, Mal went up to him and said, "My name is Mal Evans. I'm with the Beatles. Here's my card. I got a phone number. Anytime you need anything, at any time of the day or night, 24 hours, anything you want, call me." Within 24 hours, Mal would be squiring the Beatles and Nicol on the band's inaugural world tour. As with the other members of the entourage, Mal felt Ringo's absence acutely. The boys used humor to make light of their predicament. The Beatles really had fun at the pilot's expense, as he didn't know Ringo and kept asking for his autograph. Mal remembered George jumped in at one point and said to Paul, "Go on, Ringo, give him your autograph, don't be mean." Ringo's absence was hard on the drummer, too. "It was very strange, them going off without me," he said. "They'd taken Jimmy Nicol, and I thought they didn't love me anymore. All that stuff went through my head." Mal understood how Ringo felt. He had a near-constant state of anxiety over his status with the Beatles, too. By the time the band plus Nicol got to Amsterdam on June 3rd, Jimmy had fallen into the natural rhythms of the Beatles' touring life. The boys liked his easygoing ways, especially when he kept saying, "It's getting better," when asked about his experience in the Beatles' extraordinary fishbowl. When the Beatles were in Amsterdam, it proved to be liberating for them and their entourage. The Dutch police loosened their protective custody, and the boys felt free to roam the city. George remembered when they sailed along the canals that afternoon in a glass-topped boat that he saw Mal's dedication fulfilling the band's needs. George Harrison said, "We were boating on the canals, waving and being fab, and we saw a bloke standing in the crowd with a groovy-looking cloak on. We sent Mal to find out where he got it from. Mal jumped off or swam off the boat, and about 3 hours later turned up at our hotel with the cloak, which he had bought from the guy." Mal needn't have had self-doubt about his interactions with the Beatles. He was a competent roadie and had gotten even better. George worried about the number of guitar strings he broke during the band's live performances. George told Mal, "You know, Mal, they're going to break as soon as I get on stage." And sure enough, they did, one by one. Mal wrote, "But we always had a spare guitar on stage for him to use, and I would run on, grab the guitar, change the strings while he used the spare guitar, change the strings while he used the spare guitar, and have it back to him as soon as possible. It was at these moments that my mind used to go blank. I'd be on and off the stage and have it done with all systems working on automatic." In a matter of months, Mal had not only mastered the intricacies of handling the band's guitar and drum works, but had done so under high-pressure conditions of a live concert. During the cloak of darkness and after the Dutch shows had wrapped up for the night, Mal wrote, "We managed to escape this particular night and ended up frequenting the brothels which lined the canals. It was dark when we arrived, and we congratulated ourselves on having gotten away with something. And when they left at daylight, there were several thousand Beatles fans lining the banks and shouting, 'Yay, Beatles!' So we hurriedly took our red faces back to the hotel." Surprisingly, the Beatles and their entourage managed to leave the continent without having scandalous news printed by the press. Before they left the Netherlands, they began the Far East leg of their tour, and Mal showed the awesome power of the Beatles' fame to their temporary drummer. Mal wrote, "I was to take Jimmy outside in the intermission between the shows to give him some idea of the size of the Beatles following. It was nice for him to be able to walk around and enjoy this until the moment arrived when somebody recognized him, and he really got off on being chased back to the stage door." Jimmy now saw how things were with the Beatles. He said, "The day before I was a Beatle, not one girl even looked at me over. The day after, when I was suited up and riding in the back of the limo with John Lennon and Paul McCartney, they were dying just to get a touch of me." On June 7th, the Beatles and their entourage returned to London, where they boarded the first of 5 scheduled flights on their way to Hong Kong. They performed at the 1,700-seat Princess Theatre. While the group stayed behind at the hotel, Mal ventured alone in the city. I was the only one of the party to take a rickshaw ride, and I got my leg pulled a lot when I recounted the story to the boys. There I was, sitting in the back of a rickshaw, drunk as a lord, late at night, waiting to see the sights of Hong Kong. The rickshaw bowling along in fine style when we entered a tree-lined avenue. At this point, the driver tried to tempt Mal with a carnal menu that included a woman, a young girl, and a little boy. I got him to take me back to the hotel. Mind you, I'm not averse to a bit of hanky-panky, but there are limits. Well, apparently Mal's appetites were not satisfied by a mere rickshaw ride. That night, Mal ventured out to one of the city's exclusive tea houses, the kind where gentlemen sip tea, while a madam parades young women for their consideration. Mal said the idea to take her back to the hotel, and on suitable reimbursement, the late young lady would entertain you for the evening. After, my young lady kept saying, "You have such beautiful eyes. I've never seen such beautiful eyes." It did my ego a lot of good when I got my money back. Before departing Hong Kong, Mal went with the boys on a shopping trip, with the Beatles springing for an array of newly sewn clothing, courtesy of the city's tailoring establishments. George also purchased a Pentax camera from one of Hong Kong's vaunted dealers, an Ashy 1 model, the first of many such cameras he would buy. The Beatles later gifted it to Mal, knowing of his budding interest in photography, particularly in terms of documenting the Beatles' movements, not to mention supplementing his income. So I will end the video here. In this episode, the Beatles had to make some changes in their living arrangements because of the increasing fans they had. Mal enjoyed being on the movie set of A Hard Day's Night. He got along with the Beatles, but he still had a fear that he was going to do something wrong and get fired. I don't think he was in danger of being fired, even though he did lose John's favorite guitar, the Gibson Jumbo. Mal had a great idea of taking pictures of the Beatles and writing about their journey to stardom. He told his wife not to tell anyone, because the less people knew about it, the better. Then we had the near disaster when Ringo got sick and had to enter the hospital. Brian didn't know what to do, because the plans had been made months in advance, and it would be costly, and they could be sued if they didn't follow through. George Martin found a drummer named Jimmy Nicol, and Ringo was a little hurt by it, thinking he wasn't loved by anymore. George Harrison felt he needed to take up for Ringo, and said he didn't want to go on with the tour. Mal had the same feeling. I guess things were explained to them, and they proceeded, and Jimmy fit in well with the band. He liked being chased by the fans, too. They went to the Netherlands and then to Hong Kong. Mal did some exploring by himself, and the Beatles went on a shopping spree and got some tailor-made clothes. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you haven't subscribed, if you could do so, it would help the channel to grow, as well as giving it a thumbs up It's all a great help. And if you haven't clicked on the notification bell, if you could do that, it lets you know when a video is posted. I wish everybody a good day, and tune in again soon for another episode of the Beatles Forever. Thank you. Bye.